Thanks.
Welcome to the August 15, 2018 Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for the Village of Lake Bluff. We'll call the meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Member Badger?
Here.
Member Burns?
Here.
Member Danley?
Here.
Member Miller?
Here.
Member Murray is absent. Member Russell?
Here.
Chair Peters?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First matter on the docket is non-agenda items and public comment time. As you may be aware, the PCZBA allows 15 minutes for individuals who would like to approach the board on any matter not listed on the agenda. We limit the participation to 3 minutes per individual. Is there anyone who would like to approach the board at this time? All right. Item number 3, consideration of the June 20, 2018 regular meeting minutes, comprehensive plan.
Just as a note, you have corrected sets at the dais of both sets of minutes. So we did receive a few sets of corrections. Those are all accounted in there. One set is plain, one set is red line, if you'd like to take a look.
Has everyone had a chance to review the revised drafts?
Yep.
Yes.
Any further comments?
I didn't see anything.
Could we have a vote, please? Or
Move approval as corrected.
second? Roll call?
You do this by voice vote.
Voice vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item, consideration of the July 18, 2018 regular meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review?
Yes? Yes.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a voice vote.
Motion to approve.
Yeah, motion to approve. All in favor, say aye. Any opposition?
Second.
Second. Anybody else? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
You do this one,
Yeah. We're gonna swear everybody in. Yeah. Before we get to agenda item number 5, anyone who wants to testify tonight, we'd like to swear you in, please. So if you could stand. Yeah. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir? I do. Okay, please be seated. Agenda item number 5, a public hearing for text amendments concerning solar energy systems. Want to give it over?
Sure. So briefly to frame up our meeting tonight, here in a few weeks, when we set a special meeting date, we'll be getting back to some of the meatier issues on our agenda, including institutional zoning, perhaps the comprehensive plan. Here we did have a little bit of a lull, if you would, but we did have a few issues we've seen crop up in the last couple of years, wanted to bring to your attention and check with you. We also had a topical permit related to one of these. So we thought it made sense to bring these to you tonight. So in this particular case, this first one, the next item on our agenda, 600 Arbor Drive, is a request for a special use permit for solar energy systems. But before we got that far, we wanted to check with you and make sure that what we have in place for solar energy systems matches what we think is desirable, see if there was any interest in recommending any changes to the village board or re-examining what we put in place a few years ago. As you know, my memo goes into this in detail. I can provide an explanation if you like, but here, back in early 2013, we made a multi-tiered setup of solar energy systems, and some allowed here, some allowed there. The big thing was in residential areas, the most common type of solar energy system, just a roof-mounted panels. You need to go to the, you need to get a special use permit from this body, and you need to also go to the Architectural Board of Review for site plan review, which is fairly unusual in our code for residential properties. Actually, it's the only instance we know of. Excuse me. Since these were passed, we haven't seen any applications come forward for these. This is actually the first since 2013. We just want to make sure, that we have seen them in commercial districts, certainly, where they're more common, but we just want to make sure that what we have in place really matches up with what we're trying to accomplish. A couple big notes that I'll just draw to your attention from the memo. The first is we have a survey in here of other communities and what they do, the levels of review they give these things, for comparison as far as other North Shore communities. And the second is I do want to emphasize that this is an issue of interest to another one of our village's committees, the Sustainability Group, Jill Danley was formerly a member of. One of their draft goals that they're working towards recommending to the village board says we should look at solar energy systems, we should look at ways to make them more accessible for residences in the village. And there's actually a certification program that they'd like to pursue, we think, that partially it needs different treatment of solar energy to get further with it, but also just having this discussion itself counts towards meeting the requirements of getting that certification. So again, before we got to the special use permit, we wanted to give you the opportunity to discuss this. If there's any changes, we can prepare those, or if there's no desire to change those at this time, A-OK too.
Member Badger, you look ready.
I am ready. So I'm all in favor of making some changes and streamlining the process. So I recall when this went through 5 years ago or so, members of the board wanted to make sure that these requests came through and they had an opportunity to review them at the time. But with the ABR and in light of some of what the other communities are doing, I think we should make it easier to have solar panels, to install solar panels, so.
Member Burns.
I completely agree. I'm sure there are ways to make solar panels look awful, but I don't think anybody would intend to do that, and there are plenty of other ways to make things look awful for your neighbors that we don't do, like the architectural review for homes anyway. So I don't know why we would have a whole lot of oversight here, other than just general code safety type of things. But from a zoning, I would say we try to make it as easy as possible for people to install solar panels or solar energy systems. I think it would only enhance the character of the village and what we kind of stand for.
Member Danley.
I agree with both of them. I think currently there's some cost roadblocks that are in place that make it more difficult for people even to have this as an option, and I think we should make it easier. And I do encourage certification, and I know there's other committees in this village that are wanting that to take place, and happy to that. Also, even the comparables to the other communities, that I just don't like to see that we're a yes on both of them. When you really look at the rest of the North Shore, we're not even comparable. So I'm in great favor of making that change.
And by change, are you meaning across the board change, or are you making more of a line specific or
Well, we can talk about that.
technical change? And maybe we'll go around the group, and then we'll talk further about that.
If I could note briefly, Mr. Chairman, I do want to point out that, our regulations are based off a model ordinance from Lake County. Certainly of these communities, we are the most comprehensive. I can't tell if each and every one of them has talked about them or not. There's some treatment, but I do want to point out we've probably given it the most extensive discussion out of these.
Thank you. Member Miller.
My first question is answered. Why was it made a special use to begin with? For control, I suppose? You guys were on the committee at the time.
As I recall, I mean, they wanted another
Set of eyes.
wanted another set of eyes on it, and it sounds like, I mean, you've got the ABR, and then, I don't know what the role of that other committee is gonna take in this, but I think that certainly streamlining the process makes sense.
Is ABR involved now? Will be involved with the new ordinance? Or does it go straight through?
So with, and we can talk about how we want to structure this. With what we put here in place for you, the idea is, right now, there's a rarely used provision of the code, but it's there, called similar, dissimilar in our parlance. So essentially, there's, if you have something that looks radically different from what's in place, or radically too similar to what's in place, so if you're gonna propose building 5 identical homes, the building commissioner has a way to direct that to a binding review by the Architectural Board of Review. So in that one instance where the building commissioner determines, hey, something not right is going on, that can be, that review can be required. And so from time to time, I think that was put in place for spec houses. I think it's been used from time to time. I don't know the history there super well. But we wouldn't think as written, not every solar panel installation would go there.
So it'd be as, per building, per the person you said.
Yeah, so the building commissioner.
Commissioner.
In technicality, it's Drew Irvin, the village administrator, and he would make the call on something like this. Most of the day-to-day decisions that refer to the building administrator, or commissioner, excuse me, I'm usually refer to Mike Croak, who does a lot of our inspections.
So if something is out of place, does the neighbor of the person who wants to install the solar panel have any say to bring it before the village and says, this isn't right? Is there any kind of check or balance here other than the building commissioner?
As written, no. And that's true of most residential construction. If you wanted that, we could certainly,
Well, the reason I say that is if you have a ranch house and then you have a 2-story or 2.5-story house next door, and the ranch house wants to put the solar panels, it's gonna go into the second floor windows, and I know it says here that it has to meet those requirements, that it doesn't do that, but I don't know if we need an extra reassurance in here for that. That's just my opinion, my thought.
it's an important one.
Member Russell? Yeah, I too am in favor of relaxing the regulations from what we have now, and I'd actually be in favor of relaxing them a little bit further than what's been drafted, because as you mentioned, Glenn, in the staff report at the very end, with the ground-mounted systems, you could have an array in someone's backyard, and it's certainly gonna be less obtrusive than an array on a roof, which is what we're basically talking about allowing in the draft. So I would be in favor of structuring the ordinance to also allow the ground-mounted systems with the same other stipulations that you have here for the building-mounted systems, with the exception that I would want to see a rule that they not be allowed in the front yard. A flat rule for ground-mounted systems, unless the one exception to that might be the country estate, where nothing can be within 100 feet of the front property line. So accessory structures, which is what these would be, would have to be 101 feet back from the front property line on these really huge lots. Maybe that doesn't make too much of a difference, but all in all, I don't know how the other members feel about that country estate issue, but I just don't see the reason to have a more rigorous review for the ground-mounted systems, because once again, I think they'll be seen less than the building-mounted systems. I did have a question for you, Glenn, regarding the 4D in the draft, where it talks about possibly the building commissioner referring it to the Architectural Board of Review. under the provisions of the similar dissimilar ordinance. What was staff's thought in terms of if these do start popping up on roofs? How many, or what's the thinking as to how often you would refer, or what would be the criteria for referring one array, proposed array on someone's roof to the ABR for similar dissimilar review versus allowing some other system to go through on someone else's roof? Is it the front of the house versus the back of the house? Is it the percentage of roof that's covered? Is it how far the panels are gonna stick above the roof? Is there any thinking at all as to what would actually trigger sending this to the ABR to say, hey, maybe this is too much, it looks too ugly, or whatever the term would be? What was that background discussion for developing this?
Certainly, I don't want to make it sound like that was a very deep discussion. It was fairly shallow, and again, it's, most residential construction could be subject to it, but we just don't get permits that, need that review. Most people are pretty responsible homeowners. To give you a few examples, I would say certainly, on roofs, even on inclined roofs, these things don't necessarily have to be mounted flush to the roof. So at times you may get better energy production if each array is sort of, if here's your roof and this array is tilted up, tilted up, tilted up, tilted up away from the roof, you get a better sun angle. But certainly that would be an example of something that could look pretty bad at a certain point. Overhangs from the roof too much, so we don't really go into saying it has to be constrained to the footprint of the roof, something like that. But if here's your roof and here's your array, that's probably a point of concern, even though there's engineering issues with supporting that weight or supporting that wind load. Some overhang happens, things like that.
Okay, but generally speaking, if someone comes in with a system similar to what's proposed in our next agenda item, where the array is pretty much flat on the roof, you're thinking that staff would not be sending those to ABR, even if they're on the front facing the street? That's the general thinking.
I'd say so. And part of the problem there is just, as you know, these things need to generally be facing south-ish, and there's some strategy there based on what time of day you want to reach peak power. But, if you have a south-facing house, you just don't have many other options.
Yeah. And I don't know too much about these systems, but, and I tried to just Google a little bit of this concern about the glare issue from these things, and the sun bouncing the reflection and the light into someone else's house. Right now, and I know I asked you in an email earlier today, and I didn't like the answer, so
Sure.
I'm gonna make a suggestion anyway. There's, the provision I'm talking about is 4C in the draft ordinance on page 3. Does not, the building commissioner needs to determine that the proposed system does not direct concentrated solar radiation or glare onto nearby properties or roadways. And in my view, I don't think the typical municipal building commissioner has the expertise to make that kind of determination. And it seems to me that we ought to take that provision and put it in the submittal requirements for all the systems, so on page 4, that the technical experts that are designing these systems for homeowners need to design these systems so that they're not going to cause a glare problem for neighbors, and they should be required to make some sort of written statement as part of their application when they get the building permit. Because they're the people that put these in are the experts. The local guys at the Lake Forest Building Department that do our building reviews for us, or Mike Croak, they just simply do not have the expertise. I can't imagine to make that kind of determination. So I don't know why we wouldn't want to put that specific burden directly on the installer, the owner's agents. That would be my other recommendation.
I guess I take a somewhat minority position on this whole thing, and we addressed it, I think Member Badger and I addressed it 5 or 6 years ago and we had a rather robust discussion, I think, overall. And my concern does not lie with the building integrated solar energy system. That system, as I understand it, when you look at the roof, you can't even tell that the system is there. My concern lies with the building-mounted solar energy system and the ground-mounted solar energy system. I'm worried about the aesthetics, the impact of having to look theoretically at my neighbor in the backyard or front yard and getting the glare off of their solar panels. You know, we're not gonna get the utilization here that you would in the deserts or anywhere else. So it's a combination of adverse impact on neighbors, adverse visual impact, aesthetics, and potential glare. So I guess I remain opposed to any modification in the ordinance. I think the ordinance has worked out fine. We haven't had any petitions for whatever reason. But I think we could be opening up the floodgates if we lessen the regulation.
Well, just in response to that, Gary, I think when I started reading this, I was actually thinking the same thing, that sentiments that you just expressed. Wow, there's going to be people that are going to be very upset with the aesthetics if these panels start popping up on the roofs, especially the front roofs. So people on the north side with their fronts facing to the south, you know, the panels are going to end up on the front of the house if they're going to work at all. And especially after seeing the videotape of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting last week, where they followed up on the review of the home that we reviewed at our last meeting, 419 East Prospect, that they had a demolition review meeting, and there were a handful of neighbors that were pretty emphatic in their opinion that aesthetics in the community are important and should be considered. And so I think you're going to have a lot of people that feel the same way you do, Gary. But as I started to think about it, and as I thought more and more about where we are in the world and where things are going, I think there needs to be some trade-offs. And I think every once in a while, an aesthetic concern needs to be sacrificed if it's for a greater common good. And these solar systems, I think if more and more people use them, we'd all, in the long run, benefit from that. So as I said at the beginning of my comments, I am in favor of relaxing the rules to allow people to, to put them on their roofs, provided that they're done in a tasteful manner, as I think the presentation that we have in our next item for the house up on Arbor Drive. I don't think that's going to seem obtrusive at all to the neighbors. Certainly if someone came in with this huge vertical array stacked up off of the house with the panels tilted way up, I think that's when it's going to be incumbent upon staff to refer this to the Architectural Board of Review and possibly make the determination that, hey, this just is too unsightly. The whole ordinance is there in the first place to catch the really oddball proposal, for fear if someone came in with because we don't normally have architectural review of single-family homes in the community. The fear always was that someone may just decide, I like a cinder block house. I just want a plain cinder block house, and I'm going to build it. And there was nothing in our codes to stop them at all. And that was the thinking behind that ordinance in the first place. And it can be applied, as staff is suggesting, in my opinion, to something that would really be an outlandish or too obtrusive installation of solar panels. I don't really think it's going to open up the floodgates, because I suspect that at least right now the technology is such that with our weather and our lack of sunshine for so many months of the year, that they're probably pretty marginally effective. And I don't think that people have not put them up in the village. I mean, I'm not seeing them all over the North Shore and all these other communities just running rampant. So You know, it's not as easy as some decisions we have to make, but I'm gonna vote for relaxing the regulations, given that thought process.
Yeah, I guess my concern is we've got a mechanism in place that already allows for solar energy, the building integrated system. And that benefits the homeowner that wants to install it and has no adverse impact at all on his or her neighbors. And so when I was reviewing the materials and reviewing the history and everything else, I was sort of unfazed by the passage of time. But that's just one position.
I'd like to add a little bit to what you were saying, George, and also to comment about the aesthetics. I think it's hard to say one way or the other about aesthetics because it's totally a judgment call. What may be aesthetically pleasing to one person may not be to the other. But from a value perspective, I actually believe this will increase the property values in Lake Bluff, not just for the property owner, but for surrounding properties, because I think to the extent that communities embrace green technology like this, it will actually be a sought-after community for what it stands for. So I think it could have a positive general effect beyond just the homeowner. So this is definitely a trend. I do think it's going to increase. So, I mean, to your concern, I don't think it's opening a can of worms, but I would expect in the next 10 years, there will be a lot of these going up, not because Lake Bluff is going to get any sunnier, but because the cost of the technology is dropping at a very fast rate, faster than it had over the prior years. So I would like to encourage it. I know that we have the cinder block rule that if it's kind of weird, staff does have the chance to note it, but there are houses that I don't particularly like at all, and I didn't get to have any say in that, and I'm sure people may feel the same way about mine, so I don't feel like this is a big, obtrusive, super unaesthetic thing, but that's a judgment call, so it's all, one person has their own opinion.
I'd like to see a little, I'd like to see a little bit of muscle in it, because I said it and George said it about if it really is not what it should be, that if the building commissioner can't do it, then it should be in the plans of the person who is installing it, that it guarantees that it's not going to interfere with the neighbors. I'd like to see that written into the text.
Well, I think, remember, Miller, you made a good point earlier on. If you're in a 2-story, 2.5-story house and around you are one-story homes and you're looking out of your second-story window and all of a sudden there's a series of panels of solar energy devices, is that what you want to look at? And once it's up, I don't think there's going to be a nuisance argument or any other sort of legal argument that you could say, hey, this is detrimental to my personal well-being or my property or anything like that. So
I just have to think that I really think that we have a responsibility, really a global responsibility, and I think Lake Bluff should be a little bit more proactive in our thinking, and I think it is very subjective. I think Elon Musk is even developing roofs that are solar now, that these panels are probably going to be gone sooner than we realize, and it's going to blend in with the roof line. It's amazing the technology and how fast it's moving in the solar. I mean, I live part of the time in California, so I see quite a bit of it in Sonoma and Napa Valley, and my sister, and looking out over her other properties, and actually some of the reflective quality, not back at me, but around the community. It's something, part of their fabric of lifestyle that I think is, again, a responsible community. And I've been around it a lot in California, and I see what it does on such a positive level for them living not off the grid, but living within our grid and making it better. So, just
thank you.
Hey, Glenn, could you do me a favor? On page 3 of the ordinance, could you just walk us through, number 1044, the solar energy systems and permitted solar energy?
So the changes or the whole thing?
The whole, just from, paragraph A right there, that whole paragraph, if you would. Just like, what are the 1, 2, 3, 4, if you would. Like, when would we go in front of, what systems would go in front of the ABR, or not go in front of the ABR, or go in front of the staff? Can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great.
So, to lay it out before we get into this section, the ordinance makes 4 types of solar energy systems. So there's self-contained systems. You can imagine a solar, powered calculator, although that's not really what it was written for, but solar-powered pool heaters, things of that nature, essentially where it's self-contained to the device. There's building integrated energy systems, so that's the idea of the Tesla roof, the solar roof. So it's, let's say you had a roof, you take off part of the roof, you install something new that has a structural or a architectural purpose, not just flush, but it's replacing something. That's a building integrated system.
Do we know what those look like? Do we know, I mean, like, could there be glare that comes off of those as well?
So at least the ones I've seen so far are usually, here's your replacement shingle. And so the front half, which overlays the next shingle, is usually glass. The back half, which is overlaid, is usually solar modules. So it's a glass roof. I'm sure it's tinted or something like that. I can't say I've seen one in person. Could they glare? I mean, probably, but I'm sure, they've probably, again, not having seen one in person, hard for me to say, but I'm sure that they've taken some measures against that, considering that at least for the Tesla plan, my understanding is that they're installed on all, that's your roof. That's every elevation of the roof. So you have your, so those are the first 2. You have your building mounted systems. These are the most traditional. I have a roof. I put some solar panels on top of it. And those are the biggest part of the market, at least for, residential add-ons. And finally, you have standalone systems. So the ordinance says, as it is today, you're building integrated systems. So I have a roof, I replace it with solar panels. Those are permitted, no review. Self-contained systems, permitted, no review. Building mounted systems, permitted with architectural review. They would have already had to go through that in just our hard commercial districts. So L1, light industrial, L2, which is really kind of a shopping district at this point almost. And then, excuse me, AP1, which is the auto park district canals.
So if they wanted to put solar panels on, they would come in front of the architectural review?
They would go to ABR as they do for almost any exterior change.
Okay.
But they don't need a special use permit.
Okay.
So that's really treated like, if they wanted to rebuild their front facade, they'd go same process, same place, same time.
Okay.
So with the
And-
changes.
I'm sorry, and they would, right now, they'd also have to come before this body.
They would not. For a building mounted system in those 3 districts, just the ABR.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, I thought you were talking across the village.
No, just in those, industrial, shopping, auto park districts. So as the ordinance reads today, you stop there, that's it. With the changes we proposed, we get rid of the zone-based distinction. So anything that would have been subject to architectural review goes through architectural review. So the central business district, no special use permit anymore, just goes to architectural review. Same with O&R, which is really just the Torlado estate there in Tangley Oaks. Just goes to architectural review, no special use permit. Then section 4 is the real meat of it, where we've made the system of saying, okay, if you're in a residential district, if you have residential property, if you want a traditional building mounted system, here's your path. There's no, as it's written, there's no discretionary review before a board. There's no hearing. There's no anything like that. You just need to meet some pretty basic standards with the building commissioner. So first is that building it meets all of our codes, ordinances, et cetera, typical. Second is that the highest point of the solar panels don't extend above the highest point of the building. So we're trying to keep these from being the highest point. We think that's fairly common sense. Third is the standard of, it's not directing solar radiation or glare to other properties. Again, a common proposal or a common plank in these policies. To George's point, we don't want to be in the position of evaluating this ourselves. We're just being a check on the representations being made by an owner's agent. So we're making them prove to our satisfaction that this is the case, or we have the ability to decline it. And then finally, the last part of section 4 says, if this is out of line, we have this similar ordinance. the building commissioner can choose to refer it to ABR. But he can also just as equally, issue a permit without it going to the Architectural Board of Review. And the rest is just changes to match that. So Section B strikes some things, Section C remains as it is.
Now, it's a special use, if somebody wants to obviously come in front of us, it's a special use, and how would we know, how would it affect the neighbors, per se?
Well, we've got a couple options. I mean, the first is, of course, you can keep working through the applicant and what they've provided and have they provided it to your satisfaction. The second is the neighbors get a notice, they get a letter. I know I heard from one neighbor's real estate agent, I think it was yesterday or Monday, on this subject, which we'll get to. And so they have a chance to review the plans themselves, provide their own testimony, and so on. But those would really be the two biggest ways of determining that.
Thank you.
Who are they going to testify in front of?
So under the ordinance, there's no testimony involved. That piece of it goes away.
Yeah, I guess my concern is just there's very limited oversight. Because the manufacturer or the distributor or the installer is going to come in and in good faith, they're going to say, oh, there won't be any glare. Well, it all depends on the angle of the sun and the angle of the roof and everything else. And my concern is, once it's up, it's not coming down. So I think at a minimum, we should have architectural review look at each one of these plans before it's installed. Because right now, we really don't know what to expect. Because the technology is such, and I'm no expert on this, there still are a lot of those California-type, glass-type solar panels out there. And we're not seeing the integrated building-mounted technology.
It's kind of
So,
kind of
I
situation.
mean,
we're in.
I think there are risks, and I'm not sure. I guess it depends on how you address risk generally and what you're comfortable with. But it's conceivable that the house across the street from you, all of a sudden in 6 months, might have California style solar panels. And if everybody's comfortable with that, then, I mean, that's the consensus of the board. But I think you do have to think about it.
Second floor sunroom?
Pardon?
A little second floor sunroom?
Right.
Would it be unreasonable to have, when they apply for the permit, to have an outside engineering firm confirm that this is going to work? Rather than coming across to us, and that'll be our safety valve. Just a second opinion from a licensed firm.
I mean, I think that's certainly reasonable, Member Miller. I just think there has to be some sort of checks and balances here, because I think we could be disappointed with a few outcomes.
So one option, and there's kind of two different ways to go about the glare issue. One of which is that you do a presentation of information as part of the application, or, whoever's making the determination before you issue the permit, and make sure that we're comfortable that it's not. The other, you can do belt and suspenders or do it independently, is just a prohibition on anything that causes glare. And if somebody constructs, they do so at their own risk. And if we find out after the fact that there's a large amount of glare going into somebody's bedroom, we could tell them, you need to take it down. And that happens all the time with, if somebody builds something that's non-compliant, they do so at their own risk, and then we have enforcement mechanisms. The way this is currently drafted, it says that the determination is made prior to the building, but if you wanted just to put in a simple prohibition that says, number one, whether it's on the applicant, you must make a certification, so to speak, and provide, information demonstrating it will not, and then also just a blanket prohibition, it shall not cause glare. And then if we find out that somebody made a mistake, we still have a mechanism by which we can say, you need to either shift the way those panels are angled, you need to take them down, or do something to rectify the situation. But that's your call on what you want to do.
I'm in favor of the option where it's stated as prohibited, and if the issue comes up, we have the mechanism to do it. Again, I would try to make it as easy as possible for people to go this direction, and hiring an engineering firm sounds costly, and if there's any issues, then we deal with it.
I agree with that.
Sounds good to me.
I agree.
Member Danley?
I agree.
So that gives us at least some, well, it gives the individual homeowners in the neighborhoods some control over their indirect fate, so to speak. Because, you know, maybe in 5 years, as technology evolves, there might be less glare-type technology out there. Everything might be almost the building integrated type of, you know, technology, and then it doesn't really matter, at least doesn't matter to me personally.
What about dealing with the ground systems? Should we add that to this text, or leave it as a zoning board permission?
That one's certainly one we'd want to work up a bit more before we took action on.
So we're gonna leave that as is.
Yeah,
As
if there's
stated.
some interest, we can look at it for you. Certainly, that one's much more traditionally a special use. At the same time, as we talked about a little bit in the memo, as George pointed out, you know, if you're on a large lot, if you're in a country estate, you know, if it's the right scenario, that could be a lot less disruptive than panel right on, you know, the highest point of your property. So just something we
Do we have,
talked about.
do many residents have the ground-mounted solar energy systems? It's
None in the
usually
village. to our
Pool-related,
knowledge.
isn't it?
Yeah, so a pool-related one would fall into that self-contained category. We wouldn't touch it. So these would be, instead of putting the panel for your general electrical needs up on the roof, you have a standalone rack in the back.
So that'll still be special use.
That would still be a special use under this, yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion?
But is the, I mean, where are we headed with this? Are you gonna redraft it and bring it back next month then?
So we got a couple choices. I mean, the interesting issue here is we have an applicant who's, you know, before us. And so a pretty good outcome would be, if this change is coming, be nice to do it and not have to issue them a special use permit and put them through the time and expense and binding them up. And neither do we want to rush this either.
How, they're gonna make their presentation anyway, and we're gonna rule on it. We have no idea what the village board may choose to
That's
do
true.
with this, right? So it
That's correct.
seems to me we go ahead and deal with that completely independently of reworking this ordinance. I guess I'm still in favor of, if we're gonna have these checks and balances where we have this prohibition, as the village attorney suggested, which I'm highly in favor of, on the concentrated glare, and have a, you know, a statement from the installer beforehand that this system's been designed so that it isn't gonna create these problems. I don't know why we wouldn't wanna do it for the treat the ground-mounted systems the same way. I don't see the benefit of leaving that in the special use category for someone wanting to put an array in their backyard. And then having this board make the decision as to whether or not there's a glare issue. We're not gonna become experts in this. It's gotta be handled administratively, before it even, an issue like this would get to our type of board, in my view.
What's the scenario, somebody wants to put a ground-based system in, which probably will never happen because they'll become less, for small properties, I think everybody will be on the roofs. But somebody wants to put one in and their entire backyard becomes an array. I mean, that to me is like
It would
overkill.
fail zoning for accessory structure coverage.
Well, then it would still have to come to us for accessory
Well,
structures.
right, then they're coming to us because they're
Oh, 'cause
they're
it's-
violating the lot coverage
I see.
regulations.
All right, so that.
So
that's not an
it would
issue.
end up, you're right, it would end up being on a bigger lot in order to work and not come to us, which,
I don't have a problem with adding that to it.
I guess I'd rather take a little more conservative approach, see how the roof-mounted units evolve, and we can easily address ground-mounted once we see how this evolution proceeds. But that's just my own personal thought.
So the question is, the two questions, one is the ground, and then the other is, should we just redo the ordinance now? Or do we have to bring it back rewritten?
Yeah, I don't understand how big the modifications are. I would,
No, so what,
I'm wondering why we can't just
Do it now.
move as amended, or as we've discussed.
yeah, and what,
Yeah, and so what I would, what you can do here is, so I would propose adding, and this would be the language, and then you can, if you have a motion, make it. But in 10-4-4, C, adding a 1F, and the 1F will just simply say, as part of the application must include, and then it's a certification that the solar energy system shall not direct concentrated solar radiation or glare onto nearby properties or roadways. So that's the certification by the applicant. We would still keep in place, what I would recommend is the first reference to that the building commissioner makes a finding, because then if they say, well, I don't believe that, you haven't presented it, they can still do it. And then, so it's just adding that in section C, 1F, and then in addition, adding to section C, C5, which would be would be titled "No Glare," and then it would read, "No solar energy system shall direct concentrated solar radiation or glare onto nearby properties or roadways." I think it's as simple as those amendments to subsection CF, and adding C1F, and then a new C5.
Sounds good to me.
and then we'll put together these quick amendments before, if it's adopted, we would probably type it up as part of what goes to the village board, just as I read it.
I propose what he said as a motion.
I second the motion.
Any further discussion?
Okay, and we're leaving the, do we want to throw in the prohibition in the front yard for the ground mounted, since it doesn't seem to be there? I can't imagine why we would want front yard ground mounted systems, but,
That's still a special use permit.
right. No? No interest? Okay. And we're keeping in 4D as it is then, if staff wants to refer something to the Architectural Board of Review because it looks outlandish, it would, they have the ability to do that? Correct? We're leaving that in? Okay.
And we are handling both roof-mounted and yard-mounted systems.
So we, as it's proposed, we would not see the building mounted system. The ABR may see it.
Right.
But we would not.
We wouldn't, right.
We would not see it.
Ground
But we
mounted.
may, ground, if someone comes in with a ground mount, we would still deal with it.
We don't want to handle them in a similar fashion.
No, we're supposed to make it easy.
I'd prefer to see how this evolves, see what the incidence is as far as numbers and reactions and quality of presentation, so to speak. Just one thought.
And one more question for staff, and in all the calls that were made all up and down the North Shore here, did you receive any anecdotal evidence regarding problems?
The only thing to note would be just that they're not very common. You know, electrical prices are low, a lot of shade from our very strong tree ordinances, northern latitudes. Hard to make it pencil out.
Okay.
It's the only thing I heard. I will say, whoever it was, Winnetka did ask for the results of our survey because they may be considering a similar discussion in the future. I think they're the ones that right now have similar rules to us, in that the building integrated is considered a permitted use, the overtop is considered a special use.
Any further discussion? Yes, we should probably have a vote.
Yeah. So the order is random. Member Danley,
Did someone make the motion
we
first?
have a motion and a second to
Oh,
amend, and
okay.
then you'll need a motion and a second to recommend, right?
Well, I think the initial motion was with the amendments.
Oh, so
So-
just,
So the motion was to adopt as presented to you in their packet with the addition of that language in section 10-4-4 subsection C1F, and also adding that C5.
okay. So with that in mind, Member Danley?
Aye.
Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Member Badger?
Aye.
Member Miller?
Aye.
Chair Peters?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, agenda item number 6, a public hearing for 600 Arbor Drive. Mr. Cole, if you want to give an overview?
Sure. So we have these things in our village called solar energy systems.
What are they?
Well, you see,
From the very beginning.
but yes, 600 Arbor Drive up there in the Country Estate District. It's on the north side of Arbor. Very large lot, as you can see by the very large Plata survey. Miss Marietta Hans, the property owner up there, is proposing to put some solar panels on top of a garage she has there on the lot. Again, because of just how properties are situated in this area, as well as the regulations applicable to the Country Estate District, the solar panels themselves would be something in the neighborhood of, I think, 400 feet or so off the curb line, so pretty far back. Fairly straightforward application. There's some specifications in here. There's the site plan drawing, aerial photography, some pictures. The only other thing I'd note is that as I mentioned, I did receive a phone call from a realtor in the last couple days asking about it. No concerns there. So,
Was there a negative to it or a positive, or just
he
asking?
just received the notice and was curious.
All right, do we have a petitioner?
Guess I'll take that role. My tongue hurts from biting my tongue while you guys have been talking this last time. I just want to let you know that.
Well, feel free to tell us. You're the expert here. You're the installer.
It'll take too long. We'll be here till midnight. So
Yeah.
I would just suggest that as you guys move forward, get somebody that actually installs these systems to help educate whoever's drawing this stuff up. That's as far as I'll go with it.
Yeah, if you could state your name for the record and,
Ron Calgill, Winslow Power Company, Glenview, Illinois.
all right.
What was the name of your company again?
Winsol, W-I-N-S-O-L, Winslow Power Company.
And if you could provide us with a brief overview of the project and then go into standards for special use permits, that would be great.
So what we're proposing is to put the solar array on the garage. It'll be integrated into the existing system. It's already been approved by ComEd, which is required. Before you set any system, before we even bring this to you, we have to have that system approved by ComEd. They look at the grid system, make sure that what we're doing, in case we were to backfeed 100% back onto the grid, that we're not going to overpower the grid and cause issues. Because as more and more of these systems get installed, then you could actually overpower the grid by pushing too much back. We've actually been turned down once for one system in Northbrook because they've got a dump where they generate power off the natural gas coming off, the methane coming off the system. So they're already back feeding the grid enough there that we weren't allowed to put any more on. So before you move forward with any system, before you guys should accept any building permits, you should be asking for an approval letter from ComEd saying that it's okay to put the system in. So we've got our approval already from ComEd. As I can give you the paperwork if you need it. And we're not putting that much up. It's a small array. And so that would just tie into the existing system and backfeed the house. Any extra would get put back on the grid. battery systems, you don't need to worry about any leakage or battery issues like that, because it's a non-mechanical system, there are no moving parts to it.
And then, sir, if you could maybe go through the standards for special use. As you know, I think from the dialogue earlier this evening, approval does require a special use, so we just have to go through the 5 or 6 or 7 different
Yeah, I'm
standards.
sorry, I didn't have all this particular questions.
So basically, you just need to read what's been written in here. I don't know if that was done by you or the homeowner.
Oh, okay. Describe how the proposal will not adversely impact the adjacent properties. You've discussed about the dimensions of this property already. It is set back from the street, like you said, approximately 400 feet. With the amount of trees in the neighborhood and between the house and the street, I don't believe you'll even see the system from the street. From the neighbors, I didn't walk their properties, but from driving through the neighborhood, I don't think you'll see it from any of the neighbors either. So I don't see where that would impact any of the neighbors at all. Again, the property's so big to worry about it impacting future developments. I'd find it hard pressed to do it. It's such a small array that it wouldn't be much of an issue. Public. Adequate public facilities. Again, I don't see where that would be an issue described. The only thing that part of this is, we've designed this system to be 3 feet from the top, 3 feet from the sides. So if there ever is a fire in the garage, that the fire department can adequately ventilate the attic from the outside. So, well, you guys were talking earlier about panels being put over the top of the ridge, and beyond that, normally that wouldn't be allowed, because then the fire department can't ventilate that attic space properly. So they should be at least 3 feet down, giving the fire department access to that ridge. So we are down below that, so that would be the only issue that might interfere with the public, or the fire department or the police or anything like that. Traffic congestion, again, nobody's gonna see it from the street. I don't think people will be stopping to look at it, so I think you're safe there. And destruction of significant fixtures, it's mounted parallel to the roof line. So you're not, it's not going to be projected up at a 45-degree angle beyond what the roof is. If you had a low, shallow pitched roof and you were standing it up, I could see where that might be an issue aesthetically. But because this matches the pitch of the roof, it's approximately 3 inches off the roof, so that way it wouldn't adversely affect it visually anywhere. And I think that covers it, unless you guys have specific questions.
Yeah, why don't we open up to questions from the board members? I think they might have several, maybe some more general than others, but
Sure.
Why don't we start? Member Badge?
I'm just curious about the function of the array and how much power it's gonna supply to the house, and is it something where that it's gonna take the place of, how much power are you gonna be able to generate out of these arrays?
Each one's a little different, obviously, but this size array is probably gonna cover 25% of his power use. So if he was out of town and the air conditioning wasn't running, and it was a middle of the day, sunny day, he could feasibly backfeed the grid. So, which is just basically turning his meter backwards. So there are potentials for doing that, even with a smaller array, depending on what the house is using at the time. He's got a fairly large house, so that may not happen, but it is a possibility.
That's it.
So, as you probably heard, we haven't seen too many solar panels or solar energy systems go up in our town. Not specifically related to this application, but what is your impression of other communities' interest in this and process? Are they generally interested in having solar panels? Are they more stringent? What have you found the process to be like as it compares to this?
Most of them are indifferent, and I've been installing these systems since 2010, and most of the time, we go in and educate the building department as to what they need to be asking for, what they should be looking for, and what we're doing. So, over the years, more and more people or villages have put things in place to, try to get a handle on this, so that, like you guys are worried about overbuilding and people putting too much of it up, but City of Chicago has really been proactive. They used to have a really stringent process, and now I can get a permit there in one day. I go down, they have a special use, they have a whole section desk just for green installations, anything that has to do with green-related building. I sit down there, I give them my paperwork, show them what we're doing, off, and I'm up and going. So I know their systems, I know what they're asking for, so I show up with all the paperwork they're asking for, and then I'm done. That's just pretty much the end of it. So, I think your situation, I wouldn't be concerned about it. I would say more than 80% of the homes here can't have solar on them anyway because of the trees. And I don't think you're going to start letting people cut down trees to put up solar. I don't think that's a good idea either. So, some of your concerns are, I think, you're over worried about something that's just not going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Member Denley?
I was really going to ask the same question about, what the other communities are thinking, but I'll ask this. When you talk about the expense, or people are saying that initially the person that puts up the solar panels there's an expense involved in that, but the amount that you save financially in the long run through the years, or the year, is quite substantial. Can you give sort of a rough estimate on what the give and take is of a financial expense of putting, for example, solar panels?
In
to the extent that you have.
In 2010, when we first did our first system, it was $12 per watt installed is what we were doing. We're under $5 per watt now in just, the 8 years. So the cost is coming down significantly. The installation costs are going a lot smoother. The systems the whole system goes up a lot quicker and smoother now today. Cost-wise, cost savings, generally, on my house, I've got 15 panels, and I used to have regularly $180 to $200 electric bills during the summer. I'd never have one over $100 now. And during the spring and the fall, I often will get one that's $25 or $35, which is basically just the connection fees. And, everything just runs off the 15 panels I've got in my house. So you can save significant amount of money, and I would say on average, probably anywhere from 8 to 12 years, you're going to get your money back. Systems are designed they're guaranteed to work and produce what their ratings are for 20 to 25 years, but they will work way beyond that. So cost savings are coming down. The other part is that the state is rolling out some new programs right now, so the incentives are going to come back that haven't been here for the past 3.5 to 4 years. So once those incentives come back, I think you're going to see more systems start to go back up again. That's part of the lull that's been going on the past 4 years.
Did you, just real quick, did you read the article? There's a New York Times talking about California is, I think in 2 years, they're going to require that all new homes
Yes.
have solar panels.
That's it's in the new
all of
building
them.
code, yes.
New building code.
Yep.
Good for business, right?
And I think Hawaii is following suit, but California and Hawaii.
Yeah, and there's no reason to, not have them out there. Most of the panels that we've ever installed, we've never had a glaring issue. It's all matted glass, so I don't know if you guys would require the same stringent use if someone was putting up 5 skylights, but that's just my opinion. So,
Member Miller?
I have no other questions.
Member Russell?
Just a follow-up question on your comment about the concentrated glare and the matted glass. Are there different types of panels out there where some are more problematic than others? And
I think within the industry, that's probably been dealt with already, for the most part. You might have some cheaper panels that are out there that don't address that issue, but most of them all the ones we've ever installed have always been a matted glass, and we've never had any complaints or issues with glare.
so the industry is sort of self-correcting itself to address that issue of the concentrated glare complaints? Is
Correct.
that what's happening?
Yeah, and the window industry itself, with polished glass and all the UV ratings and coatings they put on the glass today, a lot of those will melt a vinyl house next door because the sun comes across, catches the glare of that window, and will melt the siding on the neighbor's house. So there's a lot of instances of that happening. And that has nothing to do with, generating power. That's just the coatings they're putting on the glass that are reflecting that sun ray to the neighbors. So,
That's all I had, thanks.
okay.
Just a couple questions. You're in E1, I think, as far as E1 zoning, so, I mean, you're dealing with a huge lot, limited or no impact on the neighbors. With respect to pitch, does the pitch change at all?
No, this is a fixed mounted system. They do make a tracking system, but that would be a ground mounted tracking system that does tracking. And the cost of putting in a tracking system today just doesn't worth the gain of just using a fixed mounted system. The difference between the two, the generation just isn't enough to warrant putting a tracking system in.
And then, I think as you gathered from our discussion earlier, if we're dealing with a building integrated solar energy system, no special use is required, how significant is the price differential?
You can't even get those systems. The solar shingles, the Tesla systems, we've been signed up for years to get that. Owens Corning had a system out for a while that they've pulled off the market. And I'm kind of leery of all of those systems. Every time you see them come up, they will never give you a square foot rating for production and power. They tell you how great they are and that you can make power, but they don't tell you how much. And the first thing you read of any solar panel, it's the rating. It's a 290 watt panel. That's the very first thing they tell you about it. How much you're making per square foot and the size of the panel. And when these integrated systems come out, they have a lot of, fluff on them, but they're not telling you what it makes. So to me, there's also a concern, a connection issue of each one of those panels now need to be connected, and each one of those panels need to stay connected. If one comes apart, the whole system gets shut down. So there's a lot of connection issues. There's a lot of continuing problems that I see with that system. You're gonna see these panels out for a long time yet before you see the integrated stuff. It's cool, it's flashy, but it's not practical.
And then with respect to the petitioner's system, little or no reflection from that.
Correct, they are matted glass, and it's also a black panel, so dark blue, black, so you're not gonna catch any reflections off of it at all.
Okay. And just for my own edification, on your own, and it has nothing to do with this petition, on your own home, what are the dimensions of the panels that you have?
They're 39 inches by 68 inches.
So about 3 by 5, 3 by 6.
Right, yeah.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. I mean, when I saw the petition and I saw it was E1 and I saw it had no impact on the neighbors, I really had little concern personally, but I think you provided us with some good education on the whole topic.
Yeah, and just one other place to check is you can Google your own house. If you go onto Google Sun Project, it'll pull up a website, Google Sun Project, type in your address, and it'll bring up what your house is, and it'll tell you whether or not it's good or bad, if you're facing the right way, how much it would make if you did put a system up there. And it tells you right away. That's the first thing I do when someone calls me asking for solar is I punch in their address on there, and if you punch in anything around the Lake Bluff area and you kind of just move around, you'll see that most of them aren't going to be that good.
And you're doing a lot of industrial type or commercial buildings, I'm sure, too.
Industrial is different. A big flat roof is just, that's a great place to put them up. They're also laid flat 5 degrees, just enough for water drainage, and you'd never see those.
Okay.
So in this climate, there's still energy efficient and cost-effective to put these up.
Oh, sure. If you compare us to Germany, Germany's on a further northern plane, and, you know, they're running, every house has got them there, a lot of them do. So they've been very proactive about putting solar up, and their climate's more like Seattle than it is Chicago. So Seattle's a lot cloudier than we are, and they're able to produce enough power to make a difference there, so.
Any other questions or comments for the petitioner?
I kept hearing you say E1 Glen is in this country or state?
Thought it was. Haven't looked at the map in the last hour.
Okay, where are you reading E1?
Oh,
Is it on the
I
application?
knew it was in, I mean, it was in one of our large.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, I
okay,
didn't-
it's not, okay.
It has no
I just
bearing
didn't
on
want
what
the
I'm thinking.
documentation to be fixed
Right.
if there was something.
Oh, no, I mean,
It's
the
country or state. so-
country estate, the lot
It's
size is
bigger than
very
E1.
significant.
Yeah.
And there are very, very few neighbors in close proximity.
Don't have to close it, you can just call for take a motion.
Yeah, do we have a motion?
I move we recommend approval.
Do we have a second? Ms. Stanley? Do we have a vote, please?
Sure. Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Badger.
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. It's been educational for us, I think.
Good, thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 7, public hearing for text amendments concerning swimming pools. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview, please.
Sure, so this is a similar story to our item on solar panels, except this time I don't have a swimming pool expert in the room. Less pressure. Maybe, I mean, you know, Ben might have been a pool hopper back in his youth, I don't know. So again, this section of our code has been around since, 1995, more or less in the same fashion as it is today. And it just, again, it may be fine and consistent with this group's desires as it is today, but we've heard some friction this year and last year about the application of it. Certainly that friction's reflected in the minutes as well. We wanted to bring a few of these issues to your attention and see if there's any desire to consider changes again tonight or on a subsequent night. So at a high level, right now, if you're building a swimming pool in the village, there's a few things that apply. The first is, you have your lot, it needs to be behind, in the rear yard, which means behind the furthest back part of the building. Can't be inset into the building, can't be alongside the building, has to be all the way behind. The second is, in most of our neighboring communities, this counts as impervious surface. It holds water, it acts like that, it sheds water, that's normal. In Lake Bluff, it also applies towards lot coverage, which is usually reserved for buildings, and then floor area ratio, which again is usually represents bulk. Usually if you have, in every other context, floor area means that you have above ground bulk that people can see, if they're standing at the street. Swimming pools is the one exception to that, doesn't really stick above ground unless it's an above grade pool, different creature, but most permanent swimming pools installations, you wouldn't see it from the street perhaps, but it would count towards bulk. And because it's, floor area ratio, usually one of the most restrictive metrics to work with on some of our smaller lots or on the east side of town, usually that means someone's looking at the difference between being able to build a house or being able to build a swimming pool to be able to work this out in our restrictions. And then there's just some general cleanup issues that you can see if you look at the text of the ordinance. So we have regulations about commercial swimming pools here in the residential district. That's good to get rid of. We have some other language that's a bit opaque if you don't work with these codes all the time. I guess the last one I'd point out that fits into both is, this is the only instance in the zoning code we can identify where if you have any nonconformities at all, you aren't allowed to build it. And so that's kind of unique, kind of unusual, and usually you don't have to prove your compliance with all these non-conforming situations to get a building permit, just with what you're changing. So again, it's a little weird in how it works in the code there. So similar to solar panels, we gave you a comparison table. Here's what our friends do. Location requirements, a lot of things, a lot of different approaches to it, none quite the same as ours. Certainly only one other community considers them for lot coverage. No other communities consider them for floor ratio. This is a little misleading chart, I realize today. Some of these communities don't have floor area ratio rules, so apologies for that. But again, in the sense that, elsewhere on the North Shore, there's not a trade-off between how much house can I build and can I have a swimming pool. So we took, again, not a recommendation per se, but we took a crack at, if we accept that these things are bad, if there's a desire to change things, what would we do to make changes? So if you go to the draft text amendment, which I think I've given my copy away. Oh, here we go. I got misordered. You'll see a lot of language just goes away. So about considering pools as accessory structures, we just wanted to deal with that directly. Same with, applying to slabs, decks, things in that nature. To be clear, you'll see in some of our neighbors, they consider the slab to be part of the pool. We haven't in the past. We recommend keeping that. We keep patios and concrete and things separate from the actual area of the pool is water-containing surface. Little quirky, but wanted to say that out loud. The biggest thing is just spelling out different clear location requirements. So instead of it having to be in the rear yard, can't be in the front yard, so it can't be in front of the house. Can't be within 10 feet of any lot line, so you are not going to be right up on a neighboring property. And then can't be within a required minimum front yard or required corner yard setback. And then also, again, a little bit of cleanup here. We put a reference to the bluff and ravine requirements. If you're on a bluff, if you're on a ravine, you have to be 20 feet back with a pool, and so that just is an indicator for people of what's going on there. Again, we take it, in this draft, we take it out of lot coverage, we take it out of floor area ratio, we take out the nonconformities rule, so it's just, here's where it can be, it counts as impervious surface, and that's it. The last note as far as substance changes, as I mentioned, we have regulations about commercial properties here in the residential chapter of the code. We just strike that. We figure if there's a need. As it is, they're not listed as a permitted use in commercial. Physical fitness facilities are special use. Those things would come before you, but then, there's just not a misleading section of the code elsewhere that you'd have to deal with if that ever came up.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Member Russell, your thoughts today?
Yeah, I'll just open with a comment. I'm so old that I was around when the swimming pool regulations were first developed in the early 90s, and
So dedicated, Member Russell, so dedicated.
the zoning board at that time just felt that they wanted a slightly bigger lot for swimming pools, and that's why they decided to include the swimming pool in the FAR regulations. And it's as simple as that. They just, you had a 600 square foot pool that someone was proposing as part of a new house. They wanted it to come out of the house, and just felt that it was that was just the sentiment of the board, for no other reason that I can recall. And then just two questions. Glenn, I didn't understand in section 3 in the draft, A, location. Point number 1 there, I agree with the shall not be located in the front yard of a lot, but then in item number 3, it's sort of repeated within any required minimum front yard. And, I understand there's a difference, but I don't think we should have them both in there, because for everybody's, edification, if in the I'm sorry, it's on page 3
It's A.
of the draft ordinance, under A, location.
Yep.
Item number 1.
Yep.
It spells out 3 different regulations, and the first one is,
We were looking for the number 3.
Right.
It's I, triple I.
so single I, shall not be located in the front yard of a lot. And I completely agree with that, because, except maybe in the country estate district, because I just don't think swimming pools should be in anybody's front yard, and it's typically possible that if someone builds their house way back on a lot, even in the R4 district, they could have the space to put a pool in the front yard. But what I was really questioning was then in item number 3, it says within any required minimum front yard, so that there's a conflict between those two, that item number 3 is more restrictive. Or no, it's less restrictive.
Well, it
So
depends, it's, yeah.
Depending on where the house is.
Yeah, it's a belt and suspenders kind of thing, probably. Made more sense to put in than to leave. So in terms of the zoning code, this is a little opaque. Front yard, we use these terms interchangeably, but the definition is, you have a front yard, here's your house, here's your lot line. The frontmost piece of the house, from there to the lot line, that's your front yard. Be 100 feet deep, can be 5 feet deep, but that's your front yard. So when we say a front yard setback or required minimum front yard, that's, I'm in R4, I'm on the east side of town, I have to be 30 feet back,
20.
20 feet back, oopsie. Got brush up on the
Sorry.
code. No, you're good. And so, again, I can't think of a situation where, you meet one and then not the other, but just in case, you cover both. You'll see some other codes, instead of dealing with front yard and this and that. There are a couple codes out there that just say it has to be in the back half of the lot. It's not a bad idea either, if that's more intuitive.
Okay, yeah, I still don't understand why we would say it can't be in the front yard, and then we would say it can't be in the minimum. It's like it's two different rules, and it leads to confusion if someone's reading the rule. And maybe even someone could come in and make the argument, well, I'm meeting number 3, my house is 50 feet back, and the required minimum front yard, the setback rule is only 20 feet, so therefore I'm gonna put this big swimming pool in the front of my house because I've got 30 feet to squeeze it in there. And I guess I would prefer in at least all the high density districts that we not allow swimming pools in the front yard. Period. So that's just my opinion.
So what if you just strike,
Just the second term front yard, yeah, that would fix it,
and then
if
you're
everybody else
addressing
agrees.
the side yard component, right?
Yeah, the corner lot side yard, I agree, there should be a setback there, because, I mean, there are corner lots in town, and we don't want someone not meeting the setback for their swimming pool, so I agree that should stay.
So your thought is to strike subparagraph I.
No, the front yard or in the item number 3, I just think it reads cleaner that way.
I agree.
I agree.
All right. Any other comments?
And then the only other thing from a historical perspective is that way back in like 2006 or 2007, and I don't know if anyone was on the ZBA back then, or the Plan Commission, there was a big proposal up on Arden Shore Drive South, the Larry Booth Estate and Mike Barrett. They were gonna subdivide the property, and Mr. Barrett was going to build a home on the easterly 5 acres. And part of that project that came before the Plan Commission and Zoning Board had a swimming pool. And it was in the front, technically it was in the front yard, the part of the lot that faced the street, but it was literally like because the lots are so big in Country Estate, it was still 300 feet behind off of the street. So the board recommended, the Plan Commission, Zoning Board recommended approval of that, but then the project died because unfortunately it was, I guess it was 2008, the recession hit. So the project didn't go anywhere. But just as background information, there was an example where someone in the Country Estate District wanted to put a pool in the front yard, and the board at that time thought for lots that big, it's still gotta be 100 feet off the street to meet the setback. Why not let them do it? But I don't really have a strong opinion either way on that. If you want those people to come before us, if they want to request a variation, that'd be fine with me.
So I'm in favor of this. I just have a question in regards to the impermeable surface. So it seems like everybody else is on the same page with this, you know, community-wise. I'm just curious though, because in my mind, although I understand that it's not going into the soil, it's retaining it. So, for example, one of those big 1,000-gallon things that we have to make people put in, are those part of the impermeable surface? Whatever space they, you know, to absorb water, because that's all they do is just collect water. And then eventually they get moved out to the water system, as far as I know. They don't like just permeate out into the earth, they hold water. So are those considered impermeable surfaces too?
No, because they're buried and there's vegetation on top.
But how does the water get?
It drains, there's a release structure. There's a little
Oh, on the bottom.
water, no, it's connected to the storm sewer system. So there's
But it gets
small
this-
release pipes that
But it goes
the
to
water in a thunderstorm can
Right.
rush in through bigger pipes. The
Got
inlet
it.
pipes allow a lot of water to come in, and then it holds it, and it drains out slowly through pipes, but they're all connected to the storm sewer system. They don't go to the,
Yeah, oh,
to the ground, because it would probably cause problems for the building foundations.
no, I understand, it's because they go to the storm sewer. So my parents had a pool when I grew up, and so, you know, the swimming pool would collect water, and then if it ever got too high, it never overflowed, but it ever got too high, they'd connect this big, you know, big hose, and they'd put it out the driveway, and it would go to the storm sewer. So, I don't know, I don't mean to nitpick on it, I'm not trying to like get on my soapbox and say we need to not have it be part of the impervious surface, but it seems like it's kind of doing a nice job in that regard in terms of collecting water that may even be causing flood somewhere else. It's actually like a retaining vessel, like those 1,000-gallons things that we're trying to get people to put in. So I almost hate to penalize someone for trying to manage flood situations by having this nice retainer. So anyway, I just didn't know if I was misunderstanding it in some way, but it seems like it would be kind of going against
No, you're
the
raising,
norm.
I agree, you're raising a good point. And the only, I know there's been, over the years, the use of the term impervious surface in our code is, it really should have said non-vegetative surfaces, because we count gravel driveways as impervious surfaces, we count paver systems as impervious surfaces, even though the water gets through. And it was all an attempt to, on the total development on any lot, we wanted to have a minimum, or the board wanted to have a minimum amount of vegetated surfaces.
Yeah.
But you do make I agree with what you're saying, Dave, that technically, unless someone has allowed their pool to get right to the top before a rainstorm, the pool is actually gonna collect and hold water, so it doesn't present the same flood potential that just a flat slab does.
Correct.
So there would be that argument of just not including it in the impervious surface rule, but then understand the yard, what's left in the rear yard. It may allow more people to put in pools,
Yeah.
because they won't be running afoul of that
And
maximum limit.
And maybe that's not a bad thing. However, almost certainly whoever puts in a pool is gonna end up putting in a lot more concrete in any case. So net, they're probably gonna be adding a lot of impervious surface. But let me just say this, softly, I would be okay with us taking off that part of it. And if everybody else is against it, I'm fine with that. I'm not gonna argue or anything like that, but I'm just throwing that out there in case everybody's like, yeah, that's a good idea. So, it was a soft kind of comment or suggestion.
If we move to relax some of these standards, do we have any idea what previously properties in the village that don't have the proper size to add a pool, if we relax these standards, are we opening up 10% of the properties that are in the village to add pools? Or do we have any effect of how relaxing these standards might play a role?
Not a great one. So, one of those things, if I could wish upon a star, we don't usually, except to the extent that in an individual building file for a building constructed since, probably 1995 or so. We have, calculations for impervious surface, floor area, things like that. Those aren't kept in a database anywhere, and they're not easily accessible, and so it's really hard to answer that question with what we have. Certainly, I would think many of these rules, combined together, are restrictive enough. I would think probably more houses than not on the east side would have a very difficult time putting in a pool. And so, certainly I think that there's a lot of potential there probably. Do I think many people will build them? I'd be surprised.
There's probably less use of a pool in this town than solar panels,
Yeah.
as far as the weather goes,
Yeah.
my opinion.
I don't know. I mean,
I
go
don't
to the
know, there's more
Lansdowne, heated
pools in Lake Bluff
pools.
than there are solar panels out there.
Yeah.
So what was the genesis of this? I mean, is it just something that you've noticed in the code that is a little
Yeah,
bit
it's-
consistent?
Well, it's come up a few times. Last year, it came up a few times this year, and then we actually have a current situation out at 600 Lansdowne where, their house is set back, they have a bluff behind them, and so they're probably gonna end up coming to you for variation next month. And during our discussions, we said, well, this could use some work. We've got minutes, even back in the day, where the board is going back and forth on this, and
So the one on
maybe it
the
makes sense to talk about.
property on Briar Lane, with these proposed changes, would they have needed to come in front of the board, or would they have?
Briar. Give me one sec to refresh myself on which one that is.
Because the homeowner bought the lot to the adjacent lot and then added a pool, which was not in the backyard, which is kind of more of that, in that house. It was
yeah.
sort of an L-shaped house, and they sort of plopped it in the L, but
Yeah.
technically it wasn't in the back, or the rear yard of the.
Yeah, Glenn, my recollection is that was strictly a side yard. It was technically in the side yard because it was an L-shaped house, and some of the pool was forward of the rear of the home.
Right.
So it was technically in the side yard, so they needed a variation to do that, and under these rules, they would not need a variation. There was no other violation, it was just it was in a side yard, and I think several times that's what's happened over the years. The pool has been, someone wants to, or needs to put it in sort of a side yard, and it's probably more common with these L-shaped houses where there's one wing of the house that extends really far back, and so technically the rear yard starts behind the furthest part of the house, and there just isn't room to put it there, but there's all this room in the side yard. So the change here would allow them to do that without having to come to us.
Any other discussion?
Still is be a special use or not? Is this a special use? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we inquired earlier as to whether or not we know how many pools there are in residential lots in Lake Bluff, and I guess we don't have that data, but I have to believe it's probably under 15 or 20. I don't think there are that many. I'm not sure, obviously, and I'm not sure whether or not a change will trigger a whole lot of pool construction either, but it seems to be relatively innocuous as far as the proposed changes. I think the critical issue is floor area, whether or not we want that excluded, and if there's any downside to having it fall outside of the floor area ratio. I'm not sure there is a downside.
I think if you can keep the impervious surface in it, floor area ratio becomes less important, I suppose.
Well, do we have a motion
So moved.
Second.
to recommend approval of the modified ordinance?
Getting rid of 3 Is. Apparently.
Yeah, with
Yes.
George's recommended change.
Right.
Okay. Any further discussion? Could we have a vote, please?
Just one moment. Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Badger,
Aye.
Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Vote carries.
All right. Agenda item number 8, staff report.
Certainly, so we'll keep it quick, we'll get you out of here. 3 items on the staff report today. The first is I'm proud to report that Mr. John Scopoletti will be rejoining us again for the fall. His summer classes have wrapped up. I understand they haven't kicked him out of school yet, so he must have done okay. But he's going to be joining us again, be a familiar face again, and we'll keep giving him some good work and keep him coming in front of you. The second is, I don't know if the opportunity has ever been extended to this group. Certainly, we're all very busy people, and I understand if you don't want to join. But here at the end of September, the state planning conference, yes, if you're a real planning nerd, is down in Springfield, Illinois. So if you want to wait.
I thought it was
No, I wish. I'd love it, but. So, on a cycle, it goes Chicago, suburbs, downstate. This is the downstate year, so totally understandable if you don't want to go. But just putting it out there that if for some reason you are interested, please let me know. We have ways to make that happen if you would like to come and attend. It's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You're more than welcome not to attend, but it is pretty interesting. Last year we had Doug Farr come out and speak, who has a big book on sustainability now, sustainable practices and the new, these things like that. So if you're ever interested, let me know. There's your plug. The last one, the one you've all been waiting for, is Rio institutional zoning. I hope you enjoyed our little variety pack tonight of fun little issues that are easy to wrap yourselves around. We will get there with this one. This is a list not for our discussion tonight, but just from your comments that were sent back over the past month. Here's what we hope we have it boiled down to, which is a lot, but also it's a one-page list, and I hope that's something we can work with. So first is, if you have anything else that needs to be on here, please shoot me an email. Give us a chance to do some legwork on that and bring you some information. The second is, as we discussed, we'd like to get a special meeting date on the calendar, be able to meet and try to work through these issues and make some forward progress. Depending on when that is, we may or may not have some comp plan material for you then as well. I would just anticipate it focusing a tight, focused meeting on institutional zoning, and we'll see where it goes from there.
I wasn't too inclined to pursue a special meeting during the summer months. My thought is maybe after Labor Day, it might work out for everybody. The kids will be in school, obviously, and maybe we could take a 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock time slot. I don't want to go 3 or 4 hours, but maybe we could make a lot of progress in 2 hours and pretty much have Rio lined up, so to speak. I know the village does want to push it forward as expeditiously and properly as we can, but we want to do the right thing. So I don't know, Glenn, what you were thinking for possible dates.
Sure. So we ask you to bring your calendars. Hope you have them. I'm thinking the week of Labor Day might be a good time. Gives us a couple extra weeks to put everything together. And so Tuesday the 4th would be an option. Thursday the 6th, I think, is actually our volunteer appreciation barbecue. So you can focus on that. That's a bigger priority. Thursday the 13th would be an option.
Works for me.
Or we could try to put it, before your regular meeting on the 19th.
19th is Yom Kippur, so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're into that issue.
I'm good with either of those, the 13th or the 4th, either of those.
I'm okay with both.
Me too.
I'm good.
I could do 4th or 13th.
I think the 4th would probably work a little bit better for us on the staff side. Do you know what you're good with, Ben?
That may not work for me, but we can have somebody else.
Well, does the 13th work for you?
I may have to do some juggling, but probably.
Okay.
So the 13th?
We'll make sure you have coverage either way if I can't be here, but I will try.
Okay. Well, for now, let's set it, you guys want to say 6 PM on the 13th?
6 PM, I think, if that's doable, that's a good start time, I think.
And as, you know, as always, if you guys would like it, we're happy to have some food brought in for you if you'd like to come straight in after work or what have you.
That works.
Okay.
So the 13th at 6, location to be announced,
Yeah, I would expect,
boardroom downstairs.
yeah, probably the conference room will work out pretty well. But stay tuned for that.
All right.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Glenn. Commissioners' report. Any questions or concerns or other issues? I guess, are we good for September 19th?
So that is a question for the group, I suppose. At this time, assuming that this swimming pool issue goes forward, I don't know that I'm expecting any petitions September 19th at this point. Doesn't mean one can't come up, but I know Yom Kippur's overlaps with that night. Certainly, we have the option to move it around or cancel it.
Yeah, you still have a quorum, I don't.
I mean, we won't be able to turn Rio around between the 13th and the 19th.
No, I wouldn't think so.
And maybe we just proceed on the 19th, especially when we don't have anything set on the agenda yet.
Wait, do what with on the 19th?
Currently, our next meeting's scheduled for September 19th.
Right.
But Yom Kippur is on the 19th, and so there might be some conflicts.
Okay.
But nothing's on the horizon right now. Rio won't turn around between the 13th and the 19th, so I suspect we might as well proceed on the 19th as scheduled.
Proceed as scheduled. Proceed as scheduled.
And we'll always, end of next week, we'll know what petitions are out there, and we can go from there.
All right.
So you'll let us know within a week if we're gonna have a meeting on the 13th? Because you'd have to have the application in.
I'd have to have the applications in by the 24th. Stay tuned.
Anything else? All right. Can we have a motion, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting closed.